Hello, I'm TMN, and welcome to today's movie review. Well, we've finally come to the end of our journey, one that should have ended 2 movies ago, and one that left people longing for the good old days of Return of the King. In the previous installment of The Hobbit, we were left with the impending doom of Smaug about to attack Lake Town. Now, I'm assuming that the only reason why they ended the previous film the way they did was so that they could service Smaug's attack as a cold open. Because it really serves no purpose to the overall plot of this film, seeing as Smaug is killed by Bard not 5 minutes into the movie, and you're just thinking to yourself, if they had just done that in the previous film, yeah, it wouldn't have been quite as much of a cliffhanger, but I still would have seen this movie anyway. But no matter, let's get on with the review. The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, is the final film in the Hobbit trilogy that should have never existed, which takes one of the shortest aspects of the book and stretches it out into 45 minutes. And if you include the extended edition, it's probably more. So, after the unnecessary Smaug intro, which should have served as the outro for the previous film, we cut back to the story of Bilbo and the dwarves. Now, as with the previous Hobbit film, this one wants to focus more on the character of Thorin and his ever-growing obsession with gold, which they call dragon sickness. When watching these films, sometimes I forget that I'm supposed to even be focusing on Bilbo's character because my mind is thinking that Thorin's the main character, even though it's not called the dwarves, it's called the Hobbit. And basically through the majority of this film, Thorin is obsessed with retrieving the Arkenstone, which is the main artifact in the dwarves' treasure room, which Thorin seeks. And in the previous film, Bilbo did get it, but Bilbo doesn't want to give it to Thorin because he's afraid that giving it to him will just further his greed and bring Thorin down a darker path. And eventually, word gets out to the other realms of Middle-earth, such as the woodland elves and the dwarves of the Iron Hills. You see, having learned that Thorin and the dwarves have reclaimed their kingdom of Erebor, and so quickly somehow, all of these people, including the refugees from Lake Town, come to collect their rewards and their share of the gold from Erebor. But of course, being the greedy little dwarf that he is, Thorin doesn't want to give up any of his gold. So Bilbo makes a deal with Thranduil, the High Elf of the Woodland Realm, by giving him the Arkenstone to trade with Thorin. But of course, this only causes Thorin to believe that Thranduil stole the Arkenstone from the dwarves, therefore betraying them, and so he calls upon his cousin Dane Ironfoot to help them fight off the elves. But the fighting feud does not last long when Azog's orc army shows up and adds on to one of the titular 5 armies. And of course, if this were the book, Bilbo would have gotten knocked out after about 5 minutes, and then he would have woken up and the battle would have been over, and this movie would only be about an hour and a half long. But this is Peter Jackson's version, so let's extend the battle into 45 minutes, therefore glorifying war, which I'm sure is the whole point that Tolkien was going for in the first place. So as always, I will start off with performances, but seeing as this film doesn't really add much of any new characters to the overall story, I will instead focus on any characters that I have neglected to talk about in my previous reviews, because this is the last one and this is the only chance I get. First off, we have Radagast the Brown. He's a very quirky individual who serves mostly as comic relief for the series. Overall, I find his character to be pretty unnecessary. He's weird, but not in a good way, and any scene that he's in just seems to drag the story down. But the performance is alright. Next, we have Thranduil, played by Lee Pace. And similar to Bard, most of his line delivery is very dramatic. The performance is average, and his character really just feels like a watered-down blonde Elrond. But yeah, I suppose the only other performance that I can really think of that I haven't talked about yet goes way back to the first Hobbit film with Andy Serkis playing Gollum. And just like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he does a very good job with the mannerisms and the voice of the character. Except the only problem with The Hobbit is, despite having many years to perfect the CGI craft and make Gollum look even more realistic than he did 10 years ago, Gollum still looked even worse. Oh yeah, and there's also a villain character named Alfred who's always like angry at Bard's character, and he always just feels like a cartoon villain. He doesn't really belong in the Hobbit universe, so yeah, I mean, he annoys me, so let's move on. Well, you know what my thoughts are on the previous 2 Hobbit scores, and this one is the worst of all, because unlike the first film, which at least had the Misty Mountains song going for it, and Desolation of Smaug, which had the Woodland Realm theme and the Lake Town theme to go for it, this film really has nothing memorable at all. No tracks stand out, it's forgettable. I don't even think I've ever listened to it all the way through once. I think I always get bored after the first 3 songs. So yeah, I'm sure you were doing your best, Howard Shore, but if you really want me to praise your work, then just wait until I review Fellowship of the Ring. But as far as the Hobbit trilogy is concerned, but moving on from the music, let's focus on the main aspect of this film, the Battle of the Five Armies. The problem with the movie itself is the battle. Tolkien's intention was to never focus on the battle itself. It was to show the after effects of the war and the depressing side that it could bring. We don't need to over-dramatize Fili's death. We don't need to over-dramatize Kili's death by making it some tragic end to a love story, which wasn't really a very good one in the first place. And if you're going to introduce the character of Tauriel in the first place, then why couldn't they have just killed her off in this film to at least sort of top off the love story and also at least not make it confusing for the next films when she's not in them at all? Oh, we just wanted to add a female character because most of The Hobbit is all male cast only. You know, newsflash, women enjoy The Hobbit as much as any guy does. You don't need to add a female just to please them. And then of course you have the over-dramatized death of Thorin when he has his final showdown with Azog. And for a fight leading up 3 movies, I always found it to be a bit of a letdown. Oh man, I can't wait to see Thorin and Azog duke it out in the final film. Oh, Azog just swings at him a couple times with a giant rock and then falls in the water. Lame. But I would have to say this film's biggest sin is that because they introduced the character of Legolas, and in the previous film Legolas had a fight scene with Bolg which left Legolas the loser, he now has to get his revenge by getting back at Bolg and this time defeating him in their fight. So, you know, instead of getting to see the awesomeness of Beorn killing Bolg, we just get to see Legolas fight him. Thanks, Peter Jackson. So, once the battle is over and Thorin and Fili and Kili are buried, Bilbo takes his share of the gold and travels back to Hobbiton. He goes home to Bag End, still with the One Ring of Power in his possession, which he got from the Goblin Tunnels in the first Hobbit film. And from there, the film ends with a clever little tie-in to the first Lord of the Rings film, and then the Hobbit series concludes. So what are my overall thoughts on this film? Well, the performances are still great, but this film probably has the most forgettable soundtrack of the entire Hobbit trilogy. Despite never actually being featured in the book, I did still enjoy how the Battle of the Five Armies played out and how they took inventive advantages with the creatures involved and how it all played out. But most of the army just looks like one conjoined mass of CGI, so it's always hard to tell what's going on and to really feel for any of the characters. So that's annoying. I suppose I could give a similar pro and con to the fact that this movie does have an R rating for the extended version. It is interesting to see them bring such a rating into the Hobbit universe, which we had never seen in any of the previous films, but the rating was really not necessary for what is supposed to be a kid's film and book. This film did at least finally end the trilogy, but is probably the worst in the series. Again, like all the Hobbit films, the Battle of the Five Armies is a mixed bag. Well guys, that's about it for today's review, and this marks the end of my first week for doing a review for every weekday. I hope you've been enjoying my videos so far, and if you have, hit that like button. Also, leave a comment down below telling me your thoughts on the film. Don't forget to hit that little bell icon to be notified whenever I post. Share this video with your friends and family, and as always, subscribe. Something tells me that when I end this review, I'll probably think of a million things that I should have commented on about the film. But again, seeing as I film these reviews without a script and I just do it on the spot, I really just talk about what comes to mind. But hopefully I've got everything covered, and I hope you, the audience, are satisfied overall with my thought on the Hobbit trilogy. But be sure to tune in next week for my reviews of a far superior trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. And until next time, I'm TMN.